Well, I'm Deep and I'm talking about Origin Eval, which is building chatbot with confidence. Essentially, it's a test automation tool which was specifically built to cater to the challenge of testing the chatbots which are built on LLMs. In terms of what are the agents of this quick talk and the demo, we just want to touch upon what is a general meaning of LLM, large language models, which are very common. I think it is something that pretty much everyone is aware of, but still we'll just touch upon it quickly. What are the unique challenges when it comes to testing the LLMs? What is the market size and the research around that for specifically in the context of LLM testing tool? And then we'll take you through the proposed test tool that and then a working demo on that one, right? So starting off with a general overview of the large language models. AI, as we see today, is mostly driven by some of the foundation models, which are large language models, right? So these models have capability to comprehend and produce human language-based output, uh, mostly driven by the probability of what goes as a next string or a character against a particular input sequence. And the noticeable LLMs that are out there, it started off with OpenAI GPT, but then you have got Google's Bird, and you've also got Anthropic, and all of those good models, which are just coming up pretty quickly every now and then. From an application a perspective, LLMs are now being widely used in chatbots most of the times, language translation, and automated content generation. It has also been actively used in a lot of voice bot kind of scenarios, which is sort of revolutionizing the communication. From an application standpoint, just so that we know how it's been evolving, just examples around customer services. So from a LLM standpoint, they can generate pretty good output against some basic user queries, and then that can also be conversed in terms of a voice conversation, right? So it is really transformative for a lot of customer service journeys. There are implementations in healthcare innovations, financial services, and education enhancements. So each of these domain, and actually the implementation is now extending into multiple such domains anyway, but they have their own peculiar aspects when it comes to leveraging LLMs. But the basic thought remains the same, that foundation models have been trained on all of the internet data, and it is a really a good way of capturing foundation models capability to solve a particular use case, right, so to speak. So, what are some of the recent advancements in LLM technology? I think first and foremost, there are constant model architecture improvements which are happening, right? So, the main goal is to ensure that the LLM architectures have got sustainable gains in performance and efficiency, basically bringing the cost and energy. Utilization levels down for the same level of inference that it needs to do against a query. There are emerging architectural innovations in terms of how these models are to be utilized from a scenario where they are some of the hobby projects to a actual enterprise level business enabling use cases. So I think there is a constant work happening in terms of how it could be utilized, and there are therefore things like fine tuning and drag techniques which have come up, which allow you to give more specific business context into the use case, and that then eventually leads to lesser hallucination and more accurate responses from LLM. We'll talk about that in a minute. How LLMs have their own little challenges when it comes to solving a real business world problem. But yes, there is work happening, and as that happens, there is also a rise of something called as agentic AI systems, which are sort of able to autonomously decompose the complex task into manageable subtasks and then execute them independently. So basically lesser and lesser human intervention and breaking down big piece of work into small chunks, and then using some of the things like tool calling to call some end-to-end automation capabilities. So so these are some of the recent advancements which have happened. And then what does it really lead to when you build such a system which is generating, let's say, in terms of a technical challenge, hallucination, factual inaccuracies, then that can cause a lot of problem to you. Like as a business, you've got reputational risks lying there. There are also things like prompt injection and adversarial misuse. So somebody could actually, get into the prompt, and then it can hack into how that particular prompt is leveraging some of your backend data, right? So it's a security concern as well. But the biggest problem remains that there is an inconsistent behavior which can come on the back of you leveraging LLM to solve your business case, right? So the models have evolved over a period of time. There are good reasoning capabilities that it has. They seem to do some fascinating jobs, right? But still, they are at the end of the day probability driven. So they're essentially telling you, basis a certain input type and basis the training data that they've had, what could be the next probable thing, in a sequence of strings, right? Essentially, right? So that can actually lead to context drift, non-deterministic things, and prompt variability. So prompt variability is like you create or you write certain instruction to the LLM, and then you do want to improve the performance of your output by trying multiple prompts, right? So essentially, the behavior is likely to change very quickly. Um, and that also means it is hard to test such a system out, because not only the variability is immense in terms of how the systems are being built. It is really complicated in the sense that when you get the response back, it is not a binary comparison that you can write. So a lot of the traditional automations would just simply fail, because if you wanted to compare two strings, that's not the case, which you'll have, or the challenge that you'll have when you're testing a chatbot, which is producing essentially relevant answers, but not exactly the same strings, right? Um, there is no standard test automation tool in the market just now. So this is a topic of research. There are people who are building frameworks, and a lot of the frameworks are developer friendly. So they allow you, if you wanted to compare for a like for like comparison, they would let you implement unit level test cases. But from a system level capability, there is not a lot, right? So this talk and this tool that we are going to take it through is pretty much a tool which allows you do a system level testing, right, from an end-to-end perspective. Now, there are other things which actually emphasize, and which are sort of things to consider when you look at the testing specifically. So from a governance and compliance challenges perspective, there are directives which are coming from each of the regions and the governments when you look to adopt such a AI system, which is inherently a little non-deterministic in approach, because then you're not controlling everything. There are strict government's controls and the regulatory and non-compliant things that the enterprises will have to follow. So I think that will drive a lot of the testing needs and a quick evaluation and benchmarking of performances against things like bias and ethical stance of your application. um, how you have your models accountability defined, because it's so hard, right? Because if you're allowing an agent system to take a certain action on the back of user action, then you really need to have a good control, and you need to ensure that it is doing the job for, let's say, 90% of the times, right. There is also an absence, like it which I touched upon earlier, on the actual test life cycle management, which will actually feed into a lot of these compliance checks and sort of audits when they'll start to happen, if you're using some of those systems. So what's the market size, what is it really, in terms of how the industry is currently. So this is just a quick analysis of where the industry is. There's a current market size of about $3 to $4 billion, specifically to LLM chatbots, right? And they're growing at about 20-22%. And that should mean that by 2030, you should have a 12 to $13 billion market. There's a testing specific market of about 150 to 400 million just now, and that market is actually likely to grow even faster than the actual chatbot market, because there's so much unknown right now on the testing side of it, right? And that would mean that you'll have a lot of opportunity, a pretty sizable market by 2030 to take care of. Uh, so forecasts for the growth in LLM testing tool looks promising, because everybody is looking to adopt generative AI in some shape and form. Almost 85% of the enterprises are keen on that. Gartner reports it. But then when they look to do that, there is a 65% of the top leadership, concerned about controls, and they're concerned about how these systems would be tested, or this could act as major deterrent in their overall journey, or at least the pace of adoption. There are AI regulations which are constantly evolving, so they're changing. They have got pretty stringent, EU Act right now, FTC, ARPA guidelines, but then because they will evolve quickly, we will have to have a system which sort of lives up to that pace, and then ensures that it gives some capability to the top enterprises to be compliant. The penetration of the chatbots is also growing, because chatbots, like I said previously around the prompt injection stuff, it brings a different level of security problem altogether. So that's another thing which a lot of people are sort of worried about. But then there are things which are happening. There's research constantly happening around how all of these challenges could be met, because the promise that the bots and the AI technology brings to enterprises is just too big to ignore. So, a quick overview of the proposed LLM tool. We're calling it Horizon AVL just now, but then what does it do in terms of the key features and functionalities? So, starting off, uh, like I mentioned previously, LLMs and AI, when we need to talk about testing of such systems, it is actually confused between two things, right? So there is a benchmarking that happens for the foundation models, and that happens against a large chunk of data which is publicly available. And what you want to do is, like, you throw all of those problem statements, all the fundamental models or the foundation models, and you benchmark against those criteria, or the expected outcomes. And then what does it do? Like, it gives you a confidence that the foundation model is performing, let's say, at a certain level against something, a similar kind of model which is competitive in nature. But then, uh, if you look at it from a system perspective, if I had a system which was implicitly built on all of these foundation models, and maybe if it was agentic system, then there are multiple such small agents talking to each other. There is eventually a black box kind of testing which is required, which just gives you what sort of functional output that you're getting, and whether that functional output is doing well against ground truth which you would have defined for your use case, right? So you really want something which is simpler than going into every single trace of the response. And there are tools which are out there in the market which lets you build observability stack, but there aren't too many tools which are solving the problem of quickly simulating the conversations, and giving you a feedback on how those conversations are doing against an expected ground truth, right? So the tool itself here would allow you to do a quick functional testing, and the behavioral validations of the LLM outputs, right? Irrespective if it is just a simple wrapper application, as they call it, or whether it is an agentic application which is going around, talking to five different agents and then getting you the response. As long as you know what is the expected response against a particular user query, you can then rate it and compare it against a set of benchmarks, and then in fact you can define your own custom KPIs and then measure performance within that as well. So there is some performance analytics. So you could look at how quick the system was responding, and you can maintain a trending about that. You can run it within the experiment. You can compare across the experiments as well. You could do something called as bias detection, which allows you to see if your model was sort of drifting towards certain things, and it is largely driven by how you set up your ground truth, right? So if you have examples of that, then you can write certain KPIs, and you could leverage the KPIs that you've got behind the scenes to detect whether your responses were getting biased against certain particular scenarios. There are dashboards which will allow you a very simple, intuitive view of what is really happening as the testing happens, and it gives you an ability to compare your performance against a set of KPIs, and then it also allows you to maybe download those reports, look at a conversational level. So if you had about 1,000 messages being replayed, you'll have a consolidated KPI, and then you can have the reporting against each of those 1,000 messages as well, right? You could do a hallucination detection factual grounding exercise, which allows you to measure the hallucination and how you were doing against the actual goal of maintaining relevance in the conversation and reducing the toxicity, right? So there is also a key ability about measuring the custom user defined business KPI. So say for example, if you're building a bot which is catering to a banking request, you might want to create a KPI which says, well, I want to understand whether all of my conversations are still banking related, right? So it allows you to set up that. You could define your KPI in plain English, and then you can actually, see how each of those conversations were doing against that KPI, and you can get a consolidated view of that KPI as well. So, what is the advantage really of using such a tool? Like I said, there are things which are happening in the industry. So there are tools like Eval, OPEC, and so many others, which are actually working on the principle of giving developers the capability to actually track the responses against a lot of such KPIs. Right? There are also things like AI Foundry, and how AWS has its own way of measuring performance in Bedrock, um, but then none of the tools are giving the core capability of using the simulated conversations just now, right? So, and even if it is, then it is more developer friendly and less for the audiences which are a little less technical in nature, right? So for us, we are focusing on solving the problem of using something which is intuitive and simple enough for the users. So we have built on a tool which is allowing you flexibility and quickly get on with the problem of testing your endpoint, while the more complicated things are being done at a unit level probably. But from an end user's perspective, you really want a simple view of the performance against a bunch of KPIs, right? We are focusing on system testing and simulated conversations, which is very different to what a lot of the current tools are doing otherwise, right? And then we are focusing on the reporting pieces so that it is really intuitive for the users.